Hello, everyone. Okay, so as it always seems to be the case these days, we're running a bit late. Let's pick up right where we left off last week and let's get going, okay? This painting from 1931 is called The Barber Shop. It's by Edward Hopper. A woman sits in a diagonal column of light against that back wall. Her features look unfinished, sort of like Hopper started sketching her in and then abandoned her, right? Just left her there, covered her over with some paint. She wears a plain dress and a white collar. Looks like she's turning through a magazine or reviewing the shop's accounts. I don't know, what do you guys think? Off to the side, the barber, her boss probably, is at work, his back to her. I want us to pay attention to how everything creates atmosphere. There's the gold rail, the whites and blues of shop's instruments, the dark artificial red, white, and blue of the barber's pole outside, that sharp fraction of bright blue sky just beyond the pole. This concentration of materials furnishes the scene with prevailing lightness, don't you think? We may be looking at an interior, but this is an interior invaded by airy, inexhaustible space. It's the abiding silence at the heart of all things. Quietly, forcefully, conviction develops. This painting has achieved consubstantiality between space's ethereal nothingness and this woman, Mariette, or her predecessor by generations, at its center. They are two forms of the same ultimate silence, the abiding silence at the heart of all things. Mariette sat watching the second hand that was larger than her body. Though it no doubt kept time and moved as fast as the much smaller second hand in her watch. A tremendous, thin-to-the-eye obelisk seemed to plod, as if it were an art installation, showing the world something about. Well, what was it? How we tell time, rather than functionally telling it. And yet it didn't seem like a work of art, but it also didn't resemble any worldly timepiece. Mariette took a bite of apple, and pulling away a jagged good piece in her mouth coincided with the stroke she saw of that second hand. So that the coincidence of the two made palpable suddenly a pulse, a central something that she could reach in and squeeze if she wanted, and wring out blood, tears, sap, ichor, yes, even that, even the vein fluid of old gods. The square around her shook and seemed to rush in and then withdraw to a great distance. then the face of the clock above the square was near. What I was saying there's the gold rail. Whites and blues of shot. Dark, red, white, and blue of pole. Laughter rose all around. She lay in a smile that could obliterate space. And there were no thoughts. There was nowhere else to go. Anyone who knew Mariette, if they had been walking by that moment, would have been shocked at an uncanny transfiguration. They would not have believed that the young, healthy woman they knew could suddenly look like she was at the end of her life. Her hair had fallen out almost completely, leaving only strands and an oily, shining, bone-pitched scalp. Her face seemed to have been cut away in places, and in others overrun by variously sized dark spots. Her mouth almost black with thinness. Her arms melted fire pokers. Her legs invisible in air. If they knew her well, or even if they had only met her that morning, wearing the black dress with the 3 white stripes at the waist, they might have walked closer, asking themselves, who is that? What happened? But they would have been disturbed by what they saw. Chances are, would have walked away quickly. Perhaps down unfamiliar streets, just to be relieved of the sight. And yet when her bus came and she stood up and turned toward him, Mariette would have looked to those same people exactly as she had that morning. As she, people would say, always did. Everyone would agree that she looked like herself. Going up the bus steps, she held out her pass to the driver and nearly apologized by reflex. She sat by a window on the ride home and looked out in vague agitation. It reminds me of something my grandmother once said to me. Form is a revolt against progress. Progress destroys everything. She was saying these things not explicitly, not by her words, but through her words, which were brief. What? I said. Progress is good. And like an ass, you wouldn't be able to vote without it. She looked at me with disdain. It was amazing, my own grandmother looking at me like I was some animal that accidentally got in the house and she had to trap it or trick it toward the door or poison it. We were in a cemetery, I should say. The furrows on her face were the same rust color as the anthills on the ground and the dirt on the footstones. For years, she tended this grave. My grandfather's. Through all weather and solitude, her vigilance against the uncut hair of the grave was unexhausted. She already belonged to this place more than she did to our city of the living. You see, she said, pointing to the long grass. Even after so many years, the burial plots remained apart from the health of surrounding grass. They were lastingly yellow, still shaped in the yellow blocks of coffin dimensions. And the rich, well-watered, dark green of the undisturbed grass around each one came right up to its edges and was held off, as if by a divine hand, making a sickly revolt against the regenerate progress of Earth, which, my grandmother said, is all form is, a revolt against progress, withered yellow, unabsorbed by undistinguished, rejuvenated green. Oh, yes. Hopper, The Barbershop, 1931. So, a peculiar forgotten poet wrote about this painting. He was a workaday poet who lived in the first half of the 20th century, and he was rumored to have been friends with Hart Crane, but he was little appreciated then, and now he's forgotten. For a time, though, he appears to have had some standing in some poetry circles. And the few descriptions we have of the man render him sober, reticent, and austere. He lived in Brooklyn alone, and the story goes, disappeared in the middle of the century among other anonymous hat and suit-wearing men passing through Grand Central Station every day. Unlike them, though, he never came back. He never ended up anywhere. Not in a family, a job, a town, a grave, or obituary. Not anywhere. And it's strange to imagine that, isn't it? Fate we can barely comprehend today with all our documenting. Unless, of course, it's a disappearance by fire or war. We can understand the nowhere of all that, I think. At least we think we can. Now, when I first saw The Barbershop, I was curious about that woman at its center, and how she looked as I imagined Mariette might have looked if she had lived generations earlier. Mariette, you ask? Mariette, I say. Leave it at that. I imagine two of them off in a field somewhere, outside all our idiocy. And no, I'll leave that alone. It was while researching the painting that I came across the workaday poet M. Solomon. I discovered him on an archived GeoCities website. Do you all remember those? No, you don't. You're too young. Well, they were common during the earlier days of the internet, when it didn't rule our lives yet and was in a place of constant insanity, rage, misinformation, and the saccharine positivity that hates intelligence. But this archive site was devoted to a variety of subjects in painting and literature, mostly from the 20th century, when it was written in a self-conscious amateur style. It featured a small section on the work of M. Solomon, along with images where relevant, as with the Hopper painting and the poem that concerns it, a poem called simply Hopper's The Barbershop. Now, one day I was walking down the street, when out of nowhere, I heard a line from the poem in my head. In voluminous white and blue. In voluminous white and blue. Voluminous. Voluminous. White and blue. They're staring at the sky. The movement that they watch above them inspires longing to pass into shared, forgetful nothingness. In voluminous white and blue. First, I had no idea where the line came from, and I repeated it several times in my head over and over to determine whether I had just spontaneously, unconsciously, composed it. Soon it was clear that I hadn't composed it myself. The line had an existing form. It came from somewhere, and no rearranging could dislodge the parts from its shape. The words returned over and over again to their places in a sequence. Well, after looking through various files and then my email, I turned up the materials copied from the GeoCities site, and this is how I remembered about M. Solomon. And I knew that the line came from his poem. Now, one of the more memorable claims on the now elusive web shrine to the forgotten poet is that his identity has never been conclusively settled, and among the few scholars who have expressed interest in his work, the possibilities seem to have been narrowed down to either a Micaiah Solomon or a Matthew Solomon, both residents of Brooklyn circa 1903 to 1960, both bachelors. And now seems a good time to mention that scholarship on M. Solomon didn't exist beyond the excerpts I read on the GeoCities website. There were anecdotes, though. Anecdotes are the purest form. They have helped me imagine this character, this man of forgotten flesh and blood. And I see him even now. Right now, up in an attic apartment somewhere. An attic in a house in a suburban part of a city. All alone, mid-lucubration. His hair wild and thin, white like wire. And his hand intrepidly shaking across a page. His glazy eyes right over the script to make out each of his own little animal letters. His face very earnest. It's troubled, but also serene. He's scanning the unstable sovereign world of his newly written page and trying desperately before his life is snuffed out to add to it. He was studying. He was studying. The old man was studying. And the singing of young women who were walking past his house angered his ears. Torture! They cried, pointing out to the few bits of hair from the bright dome of baldness. And torture! His mouth shouted back. He stood up and pushed his desk away, hobbled viciously over to the window, kicked it open, out over his window, and barked. Hey! The drunken glee stopped. Bright bunches of faces looked up at the little square of light at the dark, at the source of the sudden interruption of night, bewildered. They had the look on their faces of people struggling to make out words in a foreign language that they knew only a little. But one of them was clever.
Oh, quit grunting, you purvirulent mule!
Which, for those of you who don't know, pulverulent means dusty. The silence of night regained itself. Everything was suddenly very large. An uncertain stillness spread over the street, and rich forms of imagination filled several heads at once. Now I wonder about all that. Something in the strength of that clever young woman. I know I probably shouldn't be saying any of this to all of you. It's not exactly relevant to our subject, but why not? That clever young woman. I have my suspicions about her identity. I think that, well, maybe I've been seeing her in dreams for years. I'm not sure, I can't really say. At least not with confidence, but I've been seeing her for years. She and the old M. Solomon. Over a suburban lawn, their voices. Drunkenness and rebuke. Gulf of age. Was it two forms of loneliness? Our painting, the barber shop, remember, is all loneliness. And that woman at the table, who seems to know so much that is wordless, and to suffer so much in silence, who is the form of air, bodied, who is nothing, even when she was something, and reflects to us this basic fact, true of us all. This woman has never been only in this painting for me. And even now, earlier, I can see two of them walking together on a very quiet day. A cold, dead day before winter. Walking under graying trees, you said. so sharp as that. Fall is like another world. It floats up to us to blossom past its ceiling, which is our dream plains, our water night beds, and it drags life's currents with counter movement. Tribute is like a puddle of mud. It hides disease and murkiness. The first, not hearing. Survives us. Yes. There is small heat, a blind belief, in silence is all that survives us. Walking under graying trees, they walk on and are out, separated again by orders of years. Now, do you remember what I said earlier? The abiding silence at the heart of all things. Two going separate ways into years. One of them says, there's a small heat, it's blind belief. And the other says, in silence. But that's finishing the first person's thought. The first person had said, our bodies go prospecting for graves, but with hope, in silence. And in between, inspired by that, but with hope, the other is agreeing, yes, we hear. There's small heat, a blind belief. That small heat and blind belief is the same as the hope that the other has spoken of. Our bodies go prospecting for graves, but with hope, in silence, says one. The other says, yes, there is small heat. A blind belief is all that survives us. They have spoken the same of each other. And it's a jumble. It's confused, but it is a concurring mess. It is the same. Our hope is blind and is a conviction, and is all that survives us, and is silence. Total and everlasting human-shaped silence. So, the abiding silence at the heart of all things. Multiple forms, across people, across places, across costumes and buildings, across words and music, trees and rivers. Multiple forms, the same ultimate silence. Air and a person in the end, the same. And one. Knowing this is indefinite. It is not strengthening. It stops nothing. It's an observation. And helps us abide, not at all. The stories about M. Solomon were on the website with irregular citation. And the citations that ostensibly were given in full and stuck out for their appearance of integrity weren't hyperlinked. With this sketchiness in mind, maybe it'll be no surprise to you that I have been unable to track down anything about him in university libraries. M seems to be no more a ghost in death than he was in life. I remember reading on the site that the few references to him and his work in the correspondence of other poets mention him as M, or Solomon. It was rare for anybody to spell out his name in full. He is merely M, Sol, Solly, Solomon. As if he was nothing more than a communal invention, brought out at times to enliven the mood of a letter with his nimble puppet's uncouthness, or a flash of his puzzling talent. Well, none of his poems was ever published before they appeared online, according to the GeoCity site. Apparently, they circulated in drafts among friends, and a few were copied in letters. But as sparing mention is made of him in the correspondence of other more popular poets, it is not surprising that none of his work, as far as I can tell, has made it into the printed collections of others' letters. But then, even without the GeoCities site, you would think that I should be able to identify which poets mention him in their correspondence, and I should be able to visit archives to read unpublished M mentioning letters. You would think that at the very least Google Scholar could help, and yet nothing. There is nothing. And because the GeoCities site was not even active but archived when I found it, and because it was a half-mad project and didn't include reliable citations, you might say that the entire life of M. Solomon the poet begins and ends there. Now, we need reliable citations. I have to admit I put great trust in them, and I will have you all learn to do the same. But even with a trail of sources, can a life be tracked back out of its placid dead silence into the vigor and frenzy of its living silence, into the existence that was all the denial of its own final nature of silence? I mean, for example, what kind of beaten down, shabby surviving people made M. Solomon? And where does his line run out from to end in him? In his disappearance? His refusal of progeny? Or can we really be sure that he didn't have children? At times, well, often, I have my doubts about his very existence entirely. Was the man someone's fancy? A little fiction? Or did that portrait on a website derive from a real life of blood and facts, confusion and forgetting? The beating of an immense invisible clock is like a guillotine over us all. Well restrained, until suddenly it's not. And there's speed, and a flash, and the end comes down. And in many ways it gets easier as we get on with it, getting older, to remove ourselves. Visions are all over the street. Do you know what I mean? Well, here, a story from my own life. Along the avenue, they were flying. Seagulls, I realized. Though at first their bodies hovered with such stillness that I thought they were drones. Then I saw their wings flap and heard their throats. I was at a red light. My feet were on the ground, my hands together on my bike's handles. Horns sounded up. Loud and low. With the wind. Knowing that the light was about to change, and I would then be riding under those gulls, it struck me that they were like spirits of aspiration Circling. Circling. Seeming to sleep and be still. And yet still. Circling. Crying meanly. By nature dirty. Given to harassing both living and lifeless below. And it struck me that maybe when the light changed, I should ride my bike into the nearest sewer and hope that my body would somehow fall smoothly in. And down. Darkness. As in the most languid of dreams. And then what would be of me? Who cares? A short life transformed into an everlasting secret. Was Solomon's disappearance intentional? The man will not speak to us anymore, but through a poem on a painting. And dimly aside, at a slant, there is a woman that he is in communication with whom I too am in communication. All of us are chasing the always receding image of time, desire, completely luckless. Now, I would nail down as many lives as I could by citations of provable fact or probable fact, or a record of some sort, objectively established. I would establish for anyone I could a known record, and then let posterity judge, if they will pay enough attention to judge them at all, much less with fairness and dignity. Let posterity judge if they lived in their silence well. Did they? Did you? Do you? Do I? Well, Mariette, you were late. You've gotten to where you were going, but you are late. And who will return to tell us something beyond that? Now, I have this image that I cannot run off, a reason out of my mind. It changes form, but is recognizably always the same vision. Grandmother is reaching to cut grass, and through her care, reach her dead husband. But careful, soon she'll fall through and be in the yellow ground beside him. And then elsewhere, some permutation of two forms, guy and girl, are walking and talking, and always looking to touch each other, to hold on to each other. But their reach is always falling. There they are again. Always, the life in us is moving. It is all going onward and outward, and nothing collapses, Whitman says. But he claims to find love there, and he pretends to admit the pain of life escaping us and finding others. And how will we have lived in our silence? How will we still live? Even if undisturbed, unknown, in our afterlife silence. The Wordsworth lines, "A slumber did my spirit seal. His spirit has no motion, neither hears nor sees, rolled round in earth's diurnal course, with rocks and stones and trees." That is an easy way, a good piece. And I would aspire to that, except I have the seagulls, confused with the drones, to warn me away from aspiration. And I have Mariette, and I know about the clock, and I know it's time to settle. Let's return to our guardian spirit of disappearance and listen to him. The one thing that does seem sure is that the internet, with its strangeness and deception, it was the right place for the little extant portion of M. Solomon's work to be published. The nearly non-existent costs and casual anonymity of web publication seem fitting for a nearly non-existent poet who wrote a poem about a painting about near non-existence. He can be a model to us all, the M. Solomon of legend and unprovable fact, of a killed website, and possibly a lived life 100 years in the past, who wrote a real poem about a real painting. When morning came into our room, it seemed to be reaching, with those its hands on our faces, as if out of need, like a child, like a beggar, like an old suppliant who had leaned too far above the altar and had fallen over. Sidelong the breezes and colors of its white body. We looked outside. Bodies walked. Bodies stopped. They sat. They talked. They took pictures. And all of them spoke stillness beyond intention. was an ocean breeze. In it, a chorus of drowning did antiphony. Child voices taunting, fading. They left the sea and were thrown around in tree branches like playback, making aeolian cycles, where nature had at last become mechanical. Hopper's the Barbershop. M. Solomon. Here is our witness. She is perfectly ordinary. And this might be any day, in any country. But just as with the prairie, she's been made American. Oppressive climates, these too are now ours, but not in gray, in voluminous white and blue, which meet here is rare, akin without the loud red glory, making her, who is ours, who mute and nearly faceless, denies what is loved and hoary, sitting there like the hours, plain to all, and yet traceless.